Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I am Zachary Comeau, Executive Editor at CE Pro. I'm very excited to present today's session where we explore the science behind lighting's impact on health and wellness. For everybody watching right now who might be new to CE Pro, welcome. When the session is over, I encourage you to join our community. Follow us on social media, check out our great assortment of content and resources, which includes everything from breaking news, timely trend pieces, success stories, benchmark reports, videos, podcasts, and more webinars like this. To make things a little bit easier, you can subscribe to our newsletter to get the latest news and content delivered right to your inbox several times a week. Now let's take a quick look at the platform we're going to be using today. The On24 console you're looking at right now can be completely customized. You can move and resize windows, make the video or slides larger or smaller as you like. You'll also find an array of interactive tools in this experience. In the toolbar, you can see a media player button for your video and volume, a Q&A box where you can submit your questions at the top right of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the session. And you can also see a resource list. You can click through to download the slides and related resources provided by our friends at WAC Group. If you have any follow-up questions or need help with your experience, just send in a question to the Q&A box or press the help icon to get further guidance. We'll have the session ready for on-demand viewing very shortly after. You'll find an email in your inbox when it's ready to view. So today we're diving into the science behind human-centric lighting and circadian rhythm lighting, two critical concepts that are transforming how we think about lighting design in homes, workplaces, healthcare settings, and beyond. We're honored to be joined by two experts in this field, Mariana Figueroa, Professor and Director of the Light and Health Research Center at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, and Jennifer Bronze, Program Director of the same esteemed institution. Also joining us is Patrick Laidlaw, Director of Business Development Integration at WAC Group. Together, they'll explore what makes lighting healthy, where color tuning makes sense, and key considerations for implementing human-centric and circadian lighting systems in real-world projects. The session is grounded in science, packed with practical takeaways, and backed by years of research from one of the world's leading lighting health institutions. And with that, I'll hand it off to Patrick.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it very much. Mariana, Jennifer, thank you for joining us. You guys are the experts in this topic, and we're honored and humbled that you'll be a part and partner with us. This is an incredibly important topic. There's lots of buzzwords and terms and phrases thrown around about HCL, human-centric lighting, and circadian rhythm. It's important to commercial spaces, residential spaces, basically any space that requires lighting. And I think that with the knowledge, the actual science that the LHRC conducts and brings, and the WAC Group wanting to bring that actual science, we can maybe harness the power of lighting for good instead of budgetary evil, like it's being done in a lot of applications. So it's important to note for our audience that at the end, we are going to be posting, announcing that this will be a continuing series, that we're going to have some upcoming webinars by Mariana and Jennifer and possibly some other professionals at the LHRC. So please stay tuned. That'll be posted at the end. So we'll jump right in. They hear me talk a lot, Mariana and Jennifer, so this is all about you today. And I'm excited that you're here and that you're going to be conducting this. So would you start, Mariana, with giving us a background on the LHRC, the type of science you conduct, what you do there, and I'm sure people don't know about the Icahn School of Medicine and Mount Sinai. So can you give us some background on all of that?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure. And we're very excited to be able to talk a little bit, at least about the topic I'm passionate about, which is the effects of light on humans in general. The Light and Health Research Center, we are part of the Department of Population Health at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. We were at the Lighting Research Center at RPI for many, many years. But we did expand a little bit beyond just the engineering side, which RPI is an engineering school. So in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, we decided to move to Mount Sinai. It seems like we were following the pandemic, I guess. New York City was the whole crisis. We had decided to move because that's where we have a lot of the clinical side. So it would allow us to expand on the clinical work. The goal and our objective is really to translate the science into the application. So it really is a bridge between the science and the application. And that's why it was so important for us to be at Mount Sinai, because that's where we had the access to the clinical application. But we continue doing a lot of the stuff that we were doing at the Lighting Research Center. In fact, we have a whole lab upstate, like right in the background of, or the backyard of the Lighting Research Center, and that's where Jan is. So we kept the staff, we moved them all to Mount Sinai, but we didn't relocate them to New York City. So we continue to do work with plant health, transportation and outdoor lighting. We are, in fact, expanding a lot on the education. We're working with you guys to expand the education, because it is our belief that in order for people to understand the area and understand the science, we need to be out there talking about it. And that's really part of the goal of participating in this. And we do work with, a lot of the companies to try to translate the science into practical applications. So that's a little bit of us and who we are and what we do.
Sure. And I think it's important. So my passion and our company's passion obviously is residential and commercial lighting, but you do a lot of other things there as well. So I think you do some things with headlights. The government actually contracts you to do research for them. So this isn't a group of nerds sitting in a room with mice in a container, right? So
even though we do that too, because we actually have a study using mice, but you're absolutely right. It really is. I mean, we've been very fortunate to get funding from the National Institutes of Health, because I think the NIH sees the value of the translational research. We call it pragmatic clinical trials. So it's going out in the field, because we know from the science that lighting works. Lighting is important for people. So the question is, well, you can have all the controlled environment in the lab. The question is, once I go out in the field where everything is a mess, as we know, it's not controlled, is it still good? Is it still valid? Does it still have the same effect that we see in the lab? So my passion is really on that sort of application side, where how do we translate that science that we know exists into real life applications? And honestly, the manufacturers, because we don't make anything, so the manufacturers are a very important arm of that, because they are the ones that eventually will create the products, so that the designers, the integrators, the people that are specifying can have products that actually are designed for that kind of application. So I think that, and we're so multidisciplinary in that regard, because we do the science, we do the applications, and we work with the manufacturers to output that information so that products are available and people can actually implement that in the field.
Yeah, and I think you said an important thing too. So, and I think it's pretty exciting when in lighting all in general, whether it be commercial space, an interior designer, integrator, a residential customer, even if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's to get some paint, they always say, well, take it outside and see what it actually looks like. So to your point about a controlled environment versus what actually happens based on how much window, time of day, activities in the space, I think that's the amazing thing that a lot of our listeners are really after. And obviously that's a lot to unpack in 1 hour, which is why we're going to have a continuing series. But we'll at least cover as much as we can today. So
Absolutely.
So that's awesome. So a little bit about you, because you and Jen are both you speak all over the world. You've done incredible amounts of podcasts and these types of meetings and lectures and things like that. What made you decide to go into this topic? Did you were you a little girl playing with Barbies in the dark and you said, if only I had better light, their hair, I don't know.
We always joked that you don't really go into lighting because your high school council tells you to do it.
Right.
No, everybody gets into lighting by accident, and I was no different. I actually have an architecture background, so I came to the United States because my ex-husband came to study, and I said, "Oh, I want to study too." And then I came across the Lighting Research Center. And being an architect, I said, oh, that's great. I'm going to be doing lighting design and so on. Well, I started learning about the science of lighting and I fell in love with it. And the rest is history. I really got, my master's and then I got my PhD. And both of them, my master's was looking at the impact of light in shift workers. How do you improve and increase alertness in shift workers? And then my PhD was really looking at how your retina converts light signals into neural signals for the biological clock. So it was really a little bit of science, a little bit of application, and I just, fell in love with it, and I knew that that was the area I wanted to continue.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I didn't know that you had an architectural background.
I
Now,
do.
yes, that's awesome. There's a lot of bridges trying to be built between what an architect does, maybe what an interior designer does, maybe what a technologist does when he's implementing a system, he or she. There's all these little kind of separate bubbles, and it really all ties together because you can do an incredible architectural design, and if the lighting's not great, or you can have an incredible space, but if the workers aren't awake or
Yeah,
there's danger, because of lighting, it makes a big difference. So this is really an important
absolutely.
topic, I think, to everybody. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome, and obviously that's how you got into the research side of things, also. Um,
Yeah, and I have to say, not just the basic research, which I love, but I always felt like nobody really reads technical papers. So my goal was always to go out into the applications. And every time I would give a talk in the very beginning, people would say, well, what's the evidence? How do you really know that that works? And that really is what I think drove us as a group to start looking at the field applications. So we are generating that data showing that it works, that it's not a bogus thing. There's the basic science behind it, but you can always translate that basic science into the application. And I think we're getting to a point now where the next steps are, how do you implement that in the built environment, whether it's home or healthcare or office? And that's where, again, being able to have the products and develop the correct design and apply those products correctly at the right time of day, at the right type of fixtures, in a way that it doesn't compromise visibility, it doesn't compromise your ability to see the task, but at the same time, it helps you improve your health and well-being. So I think that integration, it fascinates me, and it's a little bit of my architecture background that just puts me a little bit into that position.
yeah, that's amazing. And I've followed, well, the Lighting Research Center when it was LRC, and now
Yep.
what I love about the videos, and obviously I'm very passionate about lighting myself. I love the little videos because they're short, 2-3 minutes, and
Yep.
it actually talks about, and this is where a lot of people lack, our human bodies, what changes we go through as we age. And you're going to talk about this, I know, but there's a whole physical side to it. This is so that leads us into my next question, which is like, okay, so is it snake oil, coming from a gypsy cart in the old Wild West, or is there real science behind this? I already know the answer, but what is the science behind human-centric lighting and circadian rhythm lighting, or the difference in the science of both?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely science behind it. I honestly, personally, I'm not sure I would say human-centric lighting or circadian lighting. I think all these terms, they can be right or wrong. But I think what it is, I mean, honestly, every lighting is human-centric lighting, whether it is circadian effective lighting or not. You do lighting for people. And that's, to me, that's really what it is. And why is that? Because lighting allows you to see in the environment. And that's really what we most know about lighting. When I did the TED-Med talk, I said, you flip the switch on, you see, you flipped it off, you don't see. And that's what everybody knows about lighting and what everybody thinks about lighting. But lighting also affects what we call our perceptual system. So it does affect how you feel in the space. It does affect how, you have all the biophilia hypothesis, which is that need of you to be close to sort of the natural environment. So that brings in daylighting. And one of the things that we're seeing is affecting your what we call it your perceptual system, but in terms of your postural control and stability. So giving people horizontal, vertical lights help them orient themselves in the space. And then you have the lighting that affects your what we call non-visual systems. A lot of people don't like that term because, you know, we share photoreceptors in the retina that are for visibility and for non-visibility, but it's a way to differentiate from visibility, which is really how it affects your biological clock in the brain, as well as a direct acute effect, which I call it like a cup of coffee. Light is almost like a cup of coffee, which maintains you alert. So you drink it and you're alert, and that happens at any time of day. For your biological clock, the time of day matters. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of science behind it. This is not snake oil. I have to say it could have been, a lot of times it can be misused, or it can be misinterpreted, or it can be used without, I think, the clarity and the basis in science as it should be. But overall, nobody should be afraid of using light for these three sort of effects that we have in humans. I think those are very well known. There's a lot of science behind it. And again, what we're trying to do is, can we translate that science to real life applications? And that's really a bulk of the work that we're doing right now. It's looking at that.
Agreed. And I think it's important to note, and you would be way better than I would, a lot of the science goes back quite a ways. I mean, we're not talking about the last 1 year or 2 years, but there's been studies done in classroom learning and studies done in other countries, not just the US, about elderly care facilities and lots of different applications that have substantiated everything you're talking about.
Absolutely. It's been years. And I can tell you, you know, one of the groundbreaking research was in 1980 when Al Louie, who is a researcher in Oregon, discovered that light suppressed the hormone melatonin. The hormone melatonin is a hormone we produce at night in darkness, and it's associated with making us sleepy. And showing that really opened up a huge amount of opportunities for us to start understanding mechanistically how is it that light affects the biological clock, because melatonin has a very close link to the biological clock. And then in the early 2000s, there was a discovery of a new photoreceptor in the eye that nobody knew we had it. It started like in the 1990s with animal studies where they removed the rods and the cones, which are the classical photoreceptors in the retina, and the animals continue to respond to light. They continue to change their wheel running activity based on a light pulse. And they said, well, how come? If they can't see, how is it that they're responding to light? And then in 2001, David Burson at Brown University actually discovered a new class of photoreceptor. And that, again, has opened up a huge amount of research. And we now know that we used all types of photoreceptors, not just the newly discovered, which has a strong influence in the biological clock, but we use all of the photoreceptors. So part of the research that we've been doing is understanding how is it that the retina combines all these signals into the biological clock, and that can lead to the development of different light spectra or different types of light that can be implemented to impact the biological clock. So I think that there has been really neat developments in the science part, but again, for us in lighting is, well, how do we use all that information into products and then into applications? And that's really, I think, where we do the bridge, which I love doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yes, you've definitely given us a great foundation to build on, that this is proven and this is real science, and we're still learning how we as human beings react and how it affects us and how do we utilize this. So should customers, and then I'll get to Jennifer with a few questions, should customers try to implement this in their home? It sounds like I already know the answer to that, but you know.
Yes, they should. I do have to say, one of the things that we're learning with our field studies, it's very interesting. The effect is much more robust in controlled environments. Okay, so if you think about healthcare facilities, people in hospital rooms where they stay for many, many days, or people in prisons, or people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, which our homes in a way, our permanent homes for the elderly, and even people that work from home, right? If you think about somebody that works from home, they wake up, they're at home, they stop working, they continue at home, and sometimes they don't even go out. So
Right.
I think,
Right.
especially after the pandemic, with a lot of the work from home, I think that the home environment, there's a lot of potential that hasn't been exploited yet. But I think that people can start using these principles. And the other thing that it's important too, and I know Jan will have some tips on how to implement that, but the other thing that it's important too is there are two parts of the day that are particularly important. One is the morning and one is the evening. And those two times are at home. So if anything, you can start your day and end your day on a good note, regardless of what you do in the middle, which is also important. But again, you can at least start and end on the right foot. Let's put it this way. So I think that any environment, and can people start doing it? Absolutely, they can. And again, if you have a more controlled environment, you're expected to see the benefits being even greater.
Sure. And you reminded me of something I read just recently, and I'm not going to get this right, so feel free, either one of you ladies, to correct me. But like going for a walk outdoors, you talk about people working from home all day. Going for a walk outdoors is the equivalent of an energy drink or a cup of coffee, or just that 5 minutes of daylight, what it can actually do to the way you feel.
Absolutely. I recommend, half an hour walk every day. They asked me before, what's the, teenagers, for example, they have a really hard time getting up. They have a hard time falling asleep early. Said, what can I do with my teenager? And I say, get a puppy, because a puppy will, make you wake up every day. It's regular. So you wake up every day at the same time. And you have to go out. So you have to get the daylight. So it's almost like an ideal scenario. Obviously, not everybody wants to get a puppy, but follow the routine of getting a puppy, where you get a puppy, where you get up, you go for a walk, you do that every day at the same time, and that's extremely healthy.
Sure. Yeah, there's no sleeping in with a puppy. He'll be there every morning for sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Jennifer, let's talk to you for a while, or hear from you for a while. So Mariana said you would tell us how we implement this. What do we do? No matter what the space, again, we're talking about all different spaces, healthcare, offices, working from home. How do we implement this? What does this mean? Are we just talking about, hey, put some cool lights in, put some warm lights in, it doesn't really matter? And I know I'm being very general and kind of sarcastic, but I'm trying to lead in to give you the wide open field of wherever you want to go with this.
Well, it is wide open, really, Patrick. The key points are that, first of all, their goals are to have very high light levels in your mornings and to step down your light levels in your evenings, your last, say, 2 hours before bedtime. So that's something that your homeowner has control over, can really bump up their light levels in the first part of their day and dim it way down. So keeping that in mind, there's a lot of different ways you could do that. You could have the puppy and go outside, of course, in your mornings. You could use add more light fixtures to the home, and they could be kind of the same style you have now, but use more of them. Or you could add an extra layer of light, so to speak, where there's a light fixture that's kind of giving you a boost of light in your mornings, and that's the main time you use it. Or you could have higher output light sources in the fixtures that you have now. So there's a lot of different ways you could achieve that kind of boost of light in the morning, as long as you can turn them down or dim them down or turn them off towards the end of your day. That's going to make a big difference in training your body about the fact that, hey, we're up and we're going to do things in the day. We're a diurnal species. And now in the evening, it's time to start shutting things down and getting ready for the evening and to go to sleep. So there's a lot of different ways that we do this. Mariana mentioned that we're working with a variety of patient populations, and we temporarily install light fixtures into many people's homes and measure how well we're able to improve various aspects of their health. When we do that, we're using kind of portable light fixtures that we temporarily put in there and have a little time clock to turn them off after a certain time. A lot of times we're using table lamps and floor lamps, but you could use permanently installed lighting for sure. When we are using temporarily installed fixtures, we have to really bump up our light output. So instead of using kind of a conventional A lamp. This is your kind of LED A lamps, 800 lumens. We're going to use something kind of a higher output, 3,000, 4,000 lumens, quite a bit bigger. And that is way too much light to be shining in people's faces. So we use a diffuser of some sort to softly light people's faces and bring the light to their eyes more comfortably, rather than a bare, tiny little light source that's going to make you squint and turn away. So that's kind of a tip that we use in our research that listeners might want to incorporate into their clients' homes. But there's a lot of different ways of approaching that in a more permanent installation in your clients' homes.
Sure, sure. Well, that's huge. You did cover a lot of stuff because things are popping into my head as you're talking. So yes, obviously, yeah, brighter light is really important. Where we position those lights, obviously, we'll talk about that in just a second. If you have some suggestions where you position it, maybe the color of light. Obviously, we have a question from Kevin. Kevin, we'll get to that in just a minute. He asked about tunable lighting, so we'll talk about tunable, yeah, in just a minute. So yeah, obviously, this is a very, very broad topic. And I think we're going to talk about circadian, not necessarily circadian entrainment, but a little bit deeper about our eyes. When you talk about the glare, the bright lights in our face, and you make this gesture, I happen to know, and I've known this for a long time from watching videos that you two have made at the LRC in the past. As we age, our lenses thicken and yellow. We can't have glare. We need more light, but less glare. And as I drive my car every day, now that vehicles are sitting up higher and headlights are brighter and whiter, glare is much more of an issue. So again, I think the application, how do we do this, is going to be really important. So how do we position these? You said, obviously brighter lights, but is there a way that makes us feel better? Obviously not white, bright light at night. If we're sleeping and we need to get up and use the restroom, then low level, very warm, right? To not disturb our circadian rhythm. And
just definitely reduce the amount of light and maybe shine it at particular things you're working on, but try to keep it out of your client's eyes as we're getting to those last couple hours of the evening. But during the earlier part of the day, when we want to have that boost of light, we're using a diffuser of some sort to softly smear out those lumens so that they're not all coming from a tiny little point source. Because no matter how old you are, even if you're a young person, having 3,000 lumens coming from a tiny little thing like that's going to just be way too glary to people. So what's great about what we're talking about here is that what's going to look good to the older adult eyes is also going to look good to people of any age, no matter how old your client is. So tucking light sources into the architecture or softly diffusing it with a diffuser of some sort in the light fixture is going to do a lot to help your client feel more comfortable and less glare uncomfortable. That makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So if I'm doing lighting for a client, so whether I'm an architect, like Mariana's background, or I'm an electrician, or I'm an integrator, or I'm a healthcare person working on a project, what do I need to consider? What do I need to consider in advance to obviously brighter fixtures, right? That's pretty easy. But are there considerations in wiring or layout, or obviously maybe a desk lamp if we want to be alert, directly in our face at a certain distance, or just obviously a higher volume of light. But what goes into like the pre-process?
Well, Patrick, I'm glad you asked, because any designer is going to be crafting a solution for that client. So getting to know that client's lifestyle, where they move through the house, at what times of day, where they spend a lot of time, and how they want it to look in general. If they like it to look very sparse and kind of Apple iPhone or something, or do they like kind of arts and crafts style? Listening to your client and how they want to feel in their home, how they live in their home, is going to help you as a designer pick a few solutions that are going to work very well with their lifestyle. And kind of craft a solution for them. So I would start by listening, ask a few questions to the client, and then work on solutions. Say I know they're going to be working in the home office quite a lot, so I might craft a few solutions for that area. If I know that they're going to be moving between the kitchen and the living room all day long, then I want to make sure I have a seamless solution that goes between those two zones, that may be more light fixtures mounted to my ceilings and the walls rather than something I'm assuming that's going to be on a table lamp. So listening and then start coming up with a few solutions for those clients is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal answer, because obviously there's not just this layover. Here's the print, lay this thing over, apply it to every room. You don't do the same thing in every room of the house. So why would you put the same light or same amount of lights or same location of lights in every room of the house? So yeah, finding out maybe where the client starts and ends their day, if that's where we need the lower light levels, or at least having a volume control to be able to turn it down. And then yeah, what do they do in each room? So that's great advice.
I'm glad you mentioned controls, Patrick, because it's what we're talking about here is really going to rely quite a lot on sophisticated lighting control systems, more than just a switch on the wall, something that will automatically adjust the light output by the time of the day. Is going to be really helpful to those homeowners. And there, you may have 3 different layers of light, down lights and wall sconces and other light fixtures that are going to need to be at various levels depending on the time of day. And you may need some accent lighting on the artwork, or where you're doing tasks at a desk or something like that, where you don't want a light shining into people's eyes, but you do want to be able to see what you're doing. Chopping things in the kitchen is another great example where you don't want those things to dim down at night. You still want to keep your fingers attached.
Sure.
So what's great about what a lot of people in this audience have up their sleeve is the ability to work with sophisticated home automation systems that can make this sort of seamless for their clients. Really helpful for this audience. It might be more challenging for other people that aren't working with lighting controls as much.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's just a quick sidebar because we still have lots more to cover, and we're going to cover this in the upcoming series. But I think that people are unaware of the lack of sleep, how it affects our bodies in so many ways. I mean, the list is just extensive. High blood pressure and you could raffle them off in a heartbeat, but the list is so extensive. So having that, even if we started at the morning and the evening, is so important to help us sleep better. We can go longer without food longer without food as humans than we can without sleep, and we don't think about that. Like I could go 3 days without eating, but I can't, survive 3 days without sleep. So it's really important. So that's awesome. Thank you. So Mariana, in your experience, you're an expert. Maybe this is an unfair question. Does the average person have any clue about any of this stuff? Do they really understand the importance of lighting? I know that there's all different grades in value engineering, and if you flip a switch, a light comes on, and that's what most people think is the way it is. But what's been your experience in that regard?
Honestly, I think everybody takes lighting for granted. I don't. We joke, at least for the circadian system, which is the system, that it's every rhythm in your body that repeats every 24 hours, and sleep-wake cycle is a great example of that. You mentioned it. We don't have like hunger. When you're hungry, your stomach tells you you're hungry, and you're hungry. When you are not getting enough circadian light or enough light to help you synchronize your biological clock, nobody's telling you this. So I think it's first of all, I don't think people are conscious about the impact of light in their health and well-being. Despite all the science behind it, I don't think people are even thinking about lighting. And in fact, even the people doing research on sleep and circadian rhythms, they don't really understand the sophistication of lighting in a way, and how you can manipulate lighting, how you can use lighting. And lighting is just this monolithic thing, and it's not. And I think that's where this audience, it can be very informative. It's in the sense that they can say, hey, we can actually make things with lighting that can be very useful in terms of not just the research, but also the application of these principles. So I don't think people understand as much about lighting, and I don't think they actually realize how important it is. And in fact, Patrick, I have to say, a lot of times when people ask me, said, what do you work with? Lighting. And they're like, what? Lightning? No, lighting. Yeah. Why? And then you start saying, well, because it has an effect on sleep. It has an effect on the circadian system. It helps. And then they're like, okay. So sometimes you have to say, I work with sleep and circadian rhythms, and then lighting is my tool. They understand it better than saying, oh, I work with lighting, and they're like, what would you do with lighting, until you start talking to them, and everybody gets interested because it affects everybody.
Sure.
You may have a kid that can't fall asleep. You may have a grandparent or a parent that's starting to have issues sleeping. You may have a premature infant in the NICU that you don't know that lighting can help with that. So there's just so many areas. And then when you start telling people how it affects all the different groups of people, everybody gets interested. So I always say that it's the easiest lecture I can give. It's about the effects of light on people, because somebody's going to say, oh, that happens to me. Oh, I know somebody that has that. And it's just, it's just an interesting topic once you start realizing how important it is.
Sure. And I think to counter that, and you kind of made mention of this with kids who can't sleep, different situations, total darkness or very dark is also very important to the sleep patterns, and readying for sleep and then getting solid sleep without all the LED indicators and the glow lamps and things like that. Lack of light is just as important as the light we need, correct?
Absolutely. It's bright and dark, and if you ask me what's a sort of in summary, what would you say it's healthy lighting? And I would say bright days, dim evenings, dark nights. That's all it is. Okay. And I can tell you that the built environment, we are muted. We're not in bright days, and we're not in dark nights. And darkness is just as important as bright. And timing, what is very interesting about the circadian system is that time matters. For the visual system, you turn on the lights at 2 in the morning, you turn on the lights at 2 in the afternoon, you can see, right? It may take you a little bit while at 2 in the morning because you've been dark adapted. So it may take you a few minutes just to get used to the light, but you're fine. With the circadian system, lighting at 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night can have a very distinct effect on the biological clock. So again, Jen mentioned that control systems become important. Does it have to be sophisticated? No, it doesn't have to be sophisticated. It could be sophisticated, but if you don't have the budget to do it sophisticated, you can still do it as a control system that will, dim up and dim down. And you have the different times of day, and you can do that. So it can be as simple as that, or it can get more complicated. It doesn't matter. But the fact is that the circadian system, it's always looking at contrast. And that's two things: contrast and regularity. You want to be regular. We joke that a healthy life is a boring life, because you're doing the same thing every day at the same time. So you're going to sleep at the same time, you're waking up at the same time. I don't know, many of you may have those wearables, the Fitbit or the Oura Ring. And what they're showing right now, I know because I have an Oura Ring, and what it keeps telling me is regularity. Last night you went to bed at one time, tonight you should try to keep it more regular. And that is true. Those are the two sort of main concepts, is contrast and regularity. And again, you can do that with lighting. So I think that's I think the power that we have in our hands.
That's awesome. And we were gonna talk about summarizing the principles of healthy lighting, but you already did. Can you repeat that trifecta I'm sure the listeners are going to want to get that.
Yeah. So it's bright days, dim evenings, dark nights. Okay. So it really is as simple as that. And the second one is regularity. You want to be regular. So, it's contrast and regularity. And I think that if you are able to do that, however you can do that, whether it's going with a half an hour walk during the day, or whether it's having a simple or complicated control system, keep that in mind. Keep that contrast, bright days, dark nights, and regularity. Keep doing it every day.
And that's our hardest part, I think, as human beings, with the constant connection now of TVs and laptops and screens and phones and things like that. But again, that's important. That's what this message is all about. We're not talking about selling product here. We're talking about better health for people. And this is one of the few things I think that we have in science, that we own all of this knowledge that's not being utilized very much today. It's a travesty in a way.
But, you know, it's interesting. You're absolutely right. But if you think about it, you know, diet, when you're on a diet, you have to follow something. You have to have willpower to continue. What I think it's amazing about lighting that we probably, to your point, we're not utilizing and we could, is what Jan said. You can make it seamless in your space without even noticing it. And I think that's the importance. And that's really what motivated me to be here today talking to this audience, is that you have the tools to be able to implement that very easily. And hopefully, you know, and again, anybody can reach out and we can talk about it. And hopefully in the education programs that we're doing in the next few months, we can show you how to do it. But it can be done, and there are positive effects. And if you can do it seamlessly, if you can do it passively, because that's one of the successes we've had in our field studies, it's passive lighting intervention. You don't have to actively look for it. You're getting it where you are. And I think those are, it's not the principles of healthy lighting, but it's the principles of implementing the healthy lighting. It's really trying to make it easy for people to, and you know, in a way, people love to have a, you know, pop up a pill. That's easier, right? Because you do it every day in the morning. You always do it regularly. You wake up and you do it. And you have to think about lighting the same way. How can you seamlessly and just naturally do that? And I think that the technology exists for us to be able to start implementing that.
Sure. Sure, especially when it could get some very basic principles to at least help. This isn't like an all or nothing thing. There's steps in between too to improve. So I think that's huge. We've got a lot of questions pouring in, but I'm going to get back to Jen with a couple more questions if I can. And Mariana, feel free to jump in. But
Sure.
Jen, and this also relates to a couple of the questions. Color tuning. What does color tuning do for the system? And there was a question about spectral temperature too, or spectrum, you know, the actual spectrum of the light. We had a couple of questions about that. So can you touch on that?
Yeah, it looks like all the questions are about color right now. So we've been getting a lot of messaging about the importance of color of our light. Color tuning, just for those of you that aren't from a lighting background, would be when you have a white light source that can shift from kind of warmish and orangish in color to a neutral whitish to a almost bluish white color, and can go back and forth with your lighting controls. There's also dim to warm, which starts at a neutral white and goes down to a warm kind of amber color as you dim it, much like our old-fashioned incandescent light sources used to. And then there's saturated color changing. You might call it RGB, red, green, blue, and a few other. These are all LED technologies, by the way. That's one where you can create all kinds of festive rainbows, and you know, when your sports team wins and so forth, you can make your whole house the color of your team or whatever. Those are all techniques that you as a lighting designer, as a decision maker, can provide to your client. But specifically as it relates to health, do you have to use color changing? No, we actually use a neutral or warm white source on those kind of temporary installations we're doing when we're visiting people in their homes temporarily. If you have a client who's from, say, a part of the world where a bluish white light source is what's normal to them, maybe they don't want kind of an orangish white light source. So it'd be fine to work with that client and their personal preferences and work with a static white light source, as long as you can dim it up and down or switch off certain layers of light when you're in the latter part of the day. So color does have an impact on your light and health, your circadian entrainment, but what's more important is just working with your client. And if you want to use a very kind of bluish white light source for someone from Asia who's accustomed to those light colors, you just maybe kind of step down the light levels even a little bit lower in the evening, but it'd be fine to use a static white light source that's bluish in color at night. And conversely, you can use a yellowish white light source in the morning, you just might need a little more of it in order to get the morning boost. So it's not mandatory. Color does have an impact, but it's kind of a third level effect. Quantity and timing of the light is much more important to the circadian entrainment, so to speak, to have a high light levels in the early part of the day and a low light level in the last couple of hours of your evening. Does that make sense, Patrick?
That's huge. That is amazing. And I think you hit the nail on the head because, first of all, a lot of people don't know that there are, even in the United States, there's geographical regions that prefer different color temperatures. And sometimes somebody does a little homework or maybe gets a lighting education in whatever form that is, takes ALA or IES or whatever type of education. Says, oh, no, you have to go 2,700. Oh, no, you have to go 3,000. To your point, there's parts of the country and parts of the world that prefer 5,000. So I think that's a really distinct point to say that the timing and, again, the volume or the intensity, how much of the light is, those are the first two things that are important. And then, you know, obviously the spectral distribution is third. So that's huge.
So Patrick, if I can just add, so when you go back to the science part, it is true that your circadian system, it's maximally sensitive to short wavelength or blue light. And that's why people think that it has to be blue or bluish white to be effective for the circadian system. So it is true. Like I said, all the three classes of photoreceptors, they respond to light for the circadian system, but they tend to be more sensitive to blue light. So because they are more sensitive, you need a little bit less amount of light to activate those photoreceptors, okay? But it doesn't mean that the photoreceptor doesn't respond to a warmer color light. It does, it's just a little bit less sensitive. So what happens is you have to increase the amount of light a little bit more. Now, how do you do that? One way to do it is, like Jan said, you dim up and you dim down, but you also can bring the fixture closer to your eyes. It's the inverse square law. It works, right? So you increase the amount of light, but just bringing fixtures. So you can start thinking about portable fixtures that you can place next to people's eyes, and you're increasing the light levels without necessarily increasing the amount of energy that you're using for that. So it's a very effective way of doing it. So yes, from the science, we are more sensitive to blue light for the circadian system, but that doesn't mean that that's the only type of light that we can use.
Sure. That's awesome. That's again, a huge point. That's why there's so much confusion, I think, about all this going on. And we have some questions about specific claims, you know, that lighting manufacturers are making. And I don't know how you feel about that. Jen, did you see those questions?
Yeah, there are several different kind of color spectrum questions, and, you know, dim to warm and so forth. And yeah, you got to listen to your client, and you can work with technology to achieve the kind of atmosphere they want to have in their home and to achieve healthy lighting if you understand how they want to live in their home and what parts of the home they tend to spend a lot of time in, if that makes sense. So
so would I be correct? And you ladies, hey, call me out on this. Really, you're the experts, right? So no hard feelings. You know, you guys know I love you. Call me out on this, but would I be correct in saying, so if there's a manufacturer that claims circadian rhythm lighting or claims that they could do circadian entrainment, or a light bulb, someone had mentioned in the questions, this light bulb says it could, but it could also not. It's really more about the application and the intensity and the time of day, according to what you're saying, right? So, I mean, we can't prove that they're wrong, but a great speaker in the wrong place is not a great speaker. A light that maybe can help you.
And let me just say, Patrick, you're correct. So I had a case many, many years ago in the very beginning when people were starting to come up with these types of systems that they were calling circadian lighting and so on. And I'm not gonna say who the manufacturer was, but it was a very interesting because it was more expensive to put in those systems because obviously the sale point was it's healthy. So I had a case where it was a nursing home where they spend more money to do it. However, unfortunately, which it wasn't incorrect from the architect, they followed the IES standards that at the time were the standards for visibility. So the standards for visibility requires lower light levels than what you need for the circadian system. It also designs for horizontal illuminance, not for vertical illuminance, which is important for the circadian system. You have to think about light reaching the back of the eye. So you have to design thinking about light that coming from above will give you a lot of light on the horizontal surface, on the work plane, but not necessarily a lot of light here. So they designed all based on visibility. So what happens is, even though this system was tunable, it changed color, it did everything that everybody says you need for the circadian, it did not deliver enough light at the eye level. So the system was not effective, not because the system was bad, but because it wasn't designed accordingly. So, you know, and that's why us being able to talk to designers and to talk to people that are specifying these things and helping them understand the principles is so important for the successful application of the systems. I think every system can do pretty much everything nowadays because they're very sophisticated systems, but if they're misapplied, it's not that the system is bad, it's simply that it's just not being used the way it should.
Sure. Yeah, we try to be very careful as a manufacturer not to make claims because, again, there's so many variables. And one of the questions about dim to warm, I think the interesting thing about dim to warm is it warms to a warmer color temperature, whether that's more relaxing or not. It also dims down at the same time. So it performs that lower volume at the same time that it creates that warmer light. So, dim to warm's not...
And I always tell people one thing that it's very important is the psychological effect of light. I mean, people may like that dim to warm. People may like that change in the color, even though you may not need that for the circadian system. You may need it just because people like it. So there's nothing wrong with using. If you have the budget to do it, there's nothing wrong. What I tell people is, if you don't have the budget, that does not mean you cannot do circadian effective lighting. You can, without a complicated system. So I think Jan has a great point, is you have to talk to your client. What's your client's budget? What's your client's preference? And I am telling you, there's no bad technology. I think there's misapplied technology, right? And then I think that there might be some claims that are just not well applied claims. Let's put it that way. The claims are just not right for the way that the product is being used. Sure.
Well, we've got about 6 minutes left. Can we take some questions to some of the ones we haven't answered yet, if you're okay with that? And I'll even just take a few wings at a couple, and you ladies correct me if I'm wrong, but Kevin asked about tunable white being used by computer or controllers, and I think there's lots of different ways to control tunable white. There's obviously advanced control systems that can do transitional scenes. There's 0 to 10 volt where you're controlling different chips on a circuit. So I don't know if being controlled by a computer or a controller is the answer, but I think you could do color shift, sunrise and sunset scenes with advanced systems, or you can also do dimmability or intensity, as well as, with just 0 to 10 volt sliders. So Juliet's asking, how does blue light affect the brain? And have you heard of Dr. Cruz and his theory? You're smiling, Mariana. I don't know if you have or not.
I have not heard of Dr. Cruz. I know how blue light affects the brain because we've done some work with that. And, you have, obviously, it affects the biological clock, so it helps entrain the circadian system. And it also has an alerting effect, so the cup of coffee effect. And also there's some work being done looking at short wavelength or blue light that has a direct effect in the amygdala, which is associated with depression. So as we know, light can reduce seasonal depression as well as depression. And one of the mechanisms is believed to be through that sort of direct effect in the amygdala. So there are brain effects of light, but I don't know the theory. I'm sorry.
Sure. Well, and that helps because there were some questions about Alaska at the end that we'll try to get to here about also, the same thing. So, so we talked about fixtures that claim circadian entrainment and how that all works. Is there a document that lays out best practices to address the level, color, and quality of light that is practical and healthful in a residential environment?
Yeah, I mean, we have worked, and I can at least vouch for that one. It's a UL design guideline, which is for day active people. And it can be implemented anywhere. It can be implemented in offices, in the homes, and so on. And it gives you guides on what's the level and the time of day and sort of a design guideline process for that. And I'm sure we're going to be covering that in the follow-up webinars that we'll be doing. So I think that, and if you can follow the UL design guideline, you can probably get there because there's I like they have like a step-by-step of the design guides, which is very helpful for people that are not used to doing that.
Sure. Well, and thank you for bringing that up again. So everybody on the call or that's watching understands, if we don't get to all the questions, there are going to be three follow-up webinars. We're going to post those right at the end on the last slide that are going to be August, September, October, correct? We have 3 dates already as prescribed. You'll be able to register for those events, and they will go much deeper into the science and application of all of this. So it is our goal to give you way more than we could cover in this hour. And I may pop on to say hello, but those are really taught by Mariana, Jennifer, and the people at the LHRC. So they are legitimate educational webinars coming up that they are presenting. And again, so that we can apply the science and help everyone.
We talked about what we can do also, Patrick, sorry to interrupt, is we can look at the questions that were not answered, and we can make sure that those are incorporated in the educational follow-ups.
Yes, and I think there was a question from Evelyn, and it talks about cutoff. With all of the inexpensive, I call it value engineering, these wafers, these puck lights, we're now getting all of this glare, and glare is definitely a big issue. And those don't address glare. Cutoff is how far a light engine, we call it regress also, is up inside of a housing or the limit of angle of glare. And so I'm sure you'll be covering those probably in the first webinar, I'm not sure, or at least the second one, and how important basic, the utility lights, basic lights are. So employees on a laptop, 8 hours a day, headaches, often they do wear blue light glasses. Do you have any quick recommendations for that?
Well, you should always refresh your eyes in the sense that you should, every half an hour, you should look out a window, sort of like focus very distant. That helps a lot with it. The blue light glasses, the blue filtering glasses, it's controversial. Nobody really knows if it actually works because you really need to do the measurements to see what is it filtering and what's not filtering. But the best thing to do is just to get your eyes off to reduce the fatigue and just let sort of your eyes focus in a very far distance, because that helps. Because what happens when you're focusing, your lenses are contracting. So there's this strain of contracting the lenses. So you want to look far away so that it relaxes, and that helps a lot. So that's just one of the ways of doing it. And remember to dim it down in the evening. If you have to work in the evening, don't get it too bright, because for that long, it may impact your biological clock.
Yes. So one other thing, I know we're at time, and I know we didn't get to all the questions. I apologize. And I can get these to Mariana and Jennifer. We can try to answer. There was one about studies regarding nighttime animals and things like that. And I know as we go deeper in these next three, we're going to get into that. So a lot of thank yous to you ladies for presenting the science and the facts. And again, we're going to go deeper August, September, October. The dates will be put up by Zach, so you can look at those. You can even go to the links and register now. And those, again, will be by our friends at the LHRC. So I can't thank you ladies enough, and I'm sure everybody that's watching this and is going to watch the recorded versions, which there will be, as Zach said, we put up. We hope this helps. We hope this clears the air, and I know we have a long way to go yet in the next 3 episodes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, yeah, thanks again to Patrick, Marianne, and Jennifer for such a really great informative session about a very interesting topic. Thanks everyone for attending. Like we said, if you're interested in exploring this topic further, there are 3 more webinars with WAC and Mariana and Jen coming up in August, September, and October. And I look forward to seeing you guys there. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. And Daniel, if you put that slide up, we'd appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.